Roman Reigns breaks down in tears after the tragic loss of a WWE legend to cancer. WWE Hall of Famer Ric Flair is showing his legendary fighting spirit, sharing a new workout video just days after revealing he is battling skin cancer and requires surgery. The post provides a positive update on his health and has been met with celebration from fans. Roman Reigns, the tribal chief, the face of modern-day WWE, is known for his strength, his dominance, and his stoic presence inside the ring. But what fans witnessed recently was something else entirely, something that shook even the most hardened hearts in the WWE Universe. The man who has led one of the most iconic eras in wrestling, who stood tall through betrayals, title wars, and family feuds, was seen breaking down in tears. And the reason? The tragic news surrounding the health battle of a man he once looked up to like family. WWE Hall of Famer Ric Flair. The heartbreaking development began with a post many fans didn't expect. Ric Flair, one of the greatest to ever step into the squared circle, publicly revealed that he is battling skin cancer. At 75 years old, Flair has already faced down death more than once. But this time, the news hit different. Because while Ric Flair has always been a symbol of resilience, this latest chapter in his life brought the reality of mortality into sharp focus, not just for the fans, but for the very men and women who followed in his footsteps. And among those affected most deeply was Roman Reigns. For Roman, Ric Flair wasn't just another legend from the past. He was a mentor, an inspiration, and a bridge between generations. Behind the scenes, Flair was known to pull younger superstars aside, offer advice, tell stories from the road, and remind them what it truly meant to carry the WWE on their shoulders. Roman, often burdened with that very responsibility, found a kindred spirit in Ric. A man who understood the pressure of expectations. A man who, like Roman, had built an empire with both charisma and credibility. So when Roman Reigns received the news of Flair's diagnosis, news that came just days after a rare moment of camaraderie between the two backstage, he was reportedly devastated. Sources close to the locker room say that Roman isolated himself for nearly an hour after the news broke. According to one staff member, he was seen sitting alone in one of the production trucks, hands shaking, head buried in his arms. For a man so carefully composed in public, this vulnerability wasn't something fans or colleagues were used to witnessing. It was like watching your big brother crumble, the source revealed. Roman doesn't cry. He doesn't even flinch when he's hurt. But this time, he couldn't hold it in. What's even more heartbreaking is the timeline. Just a few weeks before this emotional unraveling, Ric Flair had posted a video of himself in the gym. It was vintage Flair, full of energy, passion, and that undeniable flair for the dramatic. He was working out to Eye of the Tiger, sweat dripping, arms raised in triumph, almost as if defying the cancer diagnosis. That video quickly went viral, hailed as a message of hope. Fans around the world rallied behind him. So did fellow superstars. And Roman Reigns was one of the first to reach out. Though he rarely posts personal tributes, Roman reportedly sent a heartfelt voice note to Flair that brought tears to the legend's eyes. "You showed me how to walk like a champion," Roman said, according to someone who heard the message. "Now you're showing me how to fight like one." Flair was touched, but he didn't want sympathy. He never did. That's why when he dropped the bombshell about needing surgery, he did it with the same bravado he's always had. No dramatics, no pity. Just facts. And a video of him pushing himself in the gym to prove that cancer would not define him. But for Roman, this wasn't just another public announcement. It was a gut punch. You see, Roman Reigns knows too well what it means to face a life-threatening illness. His own battle with leukemia, which he first revealed publicly in 2018, changed everything. That experience left scars, emotional ones that never quite healed. And watching someone like Flair, someone who had already escaped death's grip multiple times, now having to gear up for yet another fight, was like reliving that pain all over again. Backstage at SmackDown the night after Flair's announcement, those who know Roman best say he was distant, distracted, even haunted. During a commercial break, he reportedly took off his gloves and sat in the corner of the locker room, staring at the floor. Jey Uso came by, asked if he was good. Roman nodded. But his eyes said otherwise. There were tears he wasn't letting fall in public. Not yet. But that dam was breaking. The moment it finally did was caught quietly, far away from cameras. After the main event that night, Roman returned to his private locker room. A few minutes later, Paul Heyman walked in and found him sitting on the floor, hands over his face, sobbing. For over a decade, Heyman has been one of the few people who's seen Roman at both his strongest and most fragile. But even he admitted later in a private conversation that this was different. This wasn't about the title, he said. This was about legacy. About mortality. About the man who showed Roman what greatness looked like when he was still just Joe Anoa'i. It's easy to forget that under the armor of the tribal chief lies a man who once idolized the very legends he now stands beside. And Ric Flair wasn't just a name on a poster to Roman. He was the gold standard. The prototype. The original champion who made people care about the fight, not just the win. So when Ric Flair's cancer diagnosis hit, it shattered the illusion of invincibility Roman had built for himself. The WWE Universe has been rocked by many emotional farewells and tragedies over the years. But there's something uniquely crushing about watching your heroes age, watching them struggle. Especially when they were once the ones who carried everyone else. Ric Flair is one of those heroes. And as he fights skin cancer with the same defiant spirit that earned him 16 world titles, the men and women who walked behind him are feeling the weight of that battle too. Roman Reigns isn't the only one. Superstars from all eras have quietly reached out. Charlotte Flair, Ric's daughter, posted a photo of her and her father with the caption, "Warrior spirit never dies." John Cena commented with a simple, "Rooting for you, champ." But Roman's reaction stood out, not because it was public, but because it was raw. Because this wasn't about public gestures. It was about a personal reckoning. About the fragility of life in a business that worships strength. There's an old saying in wrestling, legends never die. But the truth is, even legends bleed. Even legends suffer. And watching Ric Flair face this latest battle has peeled back the curtain not just on him, but on everyone who has ever looked up to him, Roman Reigns included. It's not just about the diagnosis. It's about what it represents, the passage of time, the fading roar of the crowd, the quiet truth that even the strongest among us are not invincible. Fans have responded with an outpouring of love, sharing stories of what Ric Flair meant to them. Clips of his iconic promos, his battles with Dusty Rhodes and Ricky Steamboat, and his unforgettable "whoa" have flooded social media. But while the fans mourn this chapter of Flair's life with nostalgia, Roman is mourning it with something deeper, grief mixed with gratitude. Because he knows better than anyone that time in this business is a ticking clock. And the ones who once lit the path for others won't be around forever. As Ric Flair prepares for surgery, the WWE locker room has come together in a quiet, unspoken show of unity. There's no big tribute show planned. No dramatic video package yet. But there are handshakes that linger longer than usual. Conversations that end with a hug. Veterans are sharing more stories. Young talents are listening more closely. And Roman Reigns? He's leading not just with power, but with emotion. With presence. And with purpose, because that's the gift Ric Flair gave him, not just a roadmap to success, but a reminder of what it means to live, to fight, to endure. The moments that follow now won't just define Flair's legacy. They will reshape how this generation honors the ones who came before. Roman Reigns may have broken down in private. But in that moment of vulnerability, he became more than just the tribal chief. He became the torchbearer for a legacy too important to forget. And in the silence that followed his tears, Roman made a quiet vow, a vow to carry that legacy, no matter what comes next. In the days that followed Ric Flair's announcement and Roman Reigns' emotional breakdown, something shifted within WWE. It was as if the air itself in the locker room had grown heavier. People didn't speak as loudly. There was a weight hanging over every pre-match warm-up, every promo rehearsal, every step down the entrance ramp. Even the younger superstars, those who didn't grow up watching Ric Flair in his prime, could feel it. Because grief in the wrestling world is never isolated. It echoes through the halls, through every ring rope and every folding chair, a reminder that this business is built on the backs of warriors who gave everything, even when they had nothing left. Behind closed doors, Roman Reigns became a different man. Not colder, not distant, but quieter, more reflective. Those who had grown used to seeing him in command. Barking orders, pacing with intensity, delivering rehearsed lines with fierce focus, were now seeing him linger in conversation with crew members. Observing, listening, reflecting. It was as if the loss he felt for Ric Flair wasn't just about the man himself, but about the time, the era, the innocence that was slipping through his fingers. Close sources have shared that Roman took it upon himself to initiate what he called a legacy council, a quiet, unofficial circle of veterans and active roster leaders to begin preserving the memory and impact of the legends who helped shape WWE. He doesn't want this generation to forget who paved the way, one insider said. It's not about Rick alone. It's about all of them, Piper, Dusty, Eddie, and now Rick, while he's still here fighting. But even as he moved with this new sense of purpose, Roman was haunted. You could see it in the way his eyes lingered on the entrance ramp before a match. The way he seemed to pause before every "acknowledge me," almost as if waiting for the ghost of Ric Flair's booming "whoa" to echo back from the rafters. That's what trauma does to a man. It doesn't just steal your peace. It infects your rhythm. Ric Flair, for his part, remained resilient. Despite the cancer diagnosis and the looming surgery, he continued to post short videos, flashes of the legend we all remember. In one, he's seen lifting light weights, laughing between reps, shouting, "I'm still the man," with that signature twinkle in his eye. And yet, if you looked close enough, you could see the toll. The tiredness behind the smile. The wince just before the camera cut. The reality that this wasn't just a show, it was a fight for his life. Roman Reigns knew that reality all too well. It's a strange fraternity, the brotherhood of those who have faced death and returned. When Roman battled leukemia, he found strength in the voices of fans, in the love of his family, and in the whispered encouragement of men like Flair, who never once allowed him to wallow. Now the roles were reversed. And Roman couldn't stand the helplessness that came with it. He reportedly began working with WWE production on a private tribute video for Flair, not one that would air to the public, but one meant for Rick himself. Something deeply personal. In it, superstars past and present recorded messages. Charlotte Flair reportedly broke down mid-recording. John Cena talked about Rick's influence on the psychology of wrestling. Seth Rollins shared how watching Rick talk through matches backstage helped him craft his in-ring identity. But Roman's segment was saved for last. He didn't read from a script. He didn't shout. He didn't wear his ring gear or a title belt. Instead, seated in a darkly lit studio with only a spotlight on his face, he looked into the camera and whispered, "You gave us all permission to be more than just wrestlers. You let us be gods. And even now, you're showing us how to fight like one." When the video was privately sent to Ric Flair, sources say he watched it alone in his home, tears falling, hands trembling. He later called Roman directly, not as the Nature Boy calling the tribal chief, but as Rick calling Joe. That phone call lasted almost 40 minutes. No one knows exactly what was said, but afterward, Rick reportedly told Charlotte, "He's ready. He doesn't need me anymore. But I'll be damned if I don't stick around to see what he becomes next." As Flair was prepped for surgery, the wrestling world collectively held its breath. Fans flooded social media with memories, well wishes, and tributes. WWE remained respectfully silent, knowing this was Rick's battle to narrate. But behind the scenes, contingency plans were quietly drawn up. Not for Rick's passing, but for the emotional fallout if the worst were to happen. Everyone remembered how WWE stumbled after the death of Eddie Guerrero, how the grief, unresolved and sudden, broke multiple stars and nearly destroyed careers. This time, they wanted to be ready. Roman Reigns, however, didn't want preparation. He wanted action. He reportedly pushed for a live event, not a tribute show, not a eulogy in waiting, but a celebration. Something Ric Flair could watch from his hospital bed. Something that would remind him that his legacy was alive now, not just after he was gone. That weekend, during a non-televised WWE live show in Charlotte, North Carolina, Flair's hometown, the unthinkable happened. Roman Reigns made a surprise appearance, unannounced, unbilled. The arena, already buzzing, erupted into chaos. But it wasn't the typical tribal chief entrance. There was no bloodline, no Heyman, no throne. Instead, Roman walked out in a custom black and gold robe, an homage to Flair's signature entrance attire. He walked down the ramp slowly, silently. And once in the ring, he looked directly into the hard cam and, with emotion in his voice, said, "Tonight isn't about the tribal chief. It's not about titles. It's about the man who made this city a kingdom. The man who turned wrestling into art. The man who gave his entire soul to this business and is still fighting. Rick, if you're watching this, we love you. And I'm going to say something I never thought I'd say." Whoa. The crowd exploded. Some fans cried. Others chanted. Many stood silently, in awe of the rawness, the reverence, the reality of that moment. And somewhere in a hospital room, hooked up to IVs and machines, Ric Flair smiled, whispered, "Thank you," and pressed his fingers gently against the TV screen. That moment wasn't scripted. It wasn't produced. It wasn't for headlines or YouTube views. It was one warrior honoring another. One generation passing the torch with gratitude instead of grief. In the days after the surgery, updates began trickling in. Flair had made it through. The procedure was tough, the recovery longer than expected, but the fight was still on. Roman Reigns, upon hearing the news, didn't celebrate publicly. But those close to him say he smiled for the first time in days. And then, as quietly as he arrived in Charlotte, he boarded a plane back to Florida alone. Not as a champion, not as a performer, but as a man who had faced his own fear of loss and emerged more human because of it. Ric Flair's recovery remains ongoing. And Roman Reigns has resumed his duties, stepping back into storylines, feuds, and title matches. But something has changed. There's a different energy behind his promos now. A new depth in his eyes. He's still the tribal chief. Still the head of the table. But behind the fire, there's now a flicker of vulnerability. Of legacy. Of love. Because for all the pain this journey has brought, it also reminded Roman, and all of us, that greatness isn't just about what you achieve in your prime. It's about how you're remembered when the spotlight fades. And thanks to Ric Flair's fight, his legacy, and his refusal to go quietly, Roman Reigns has seen the future. And it looks like something worth fighting for. As Roman Reigns returned to television in the weeks following Ric Flair's surgery, something deeper lingered beneath the surface of his presence. Yes, the character of the tribal chief remained intact, calculated, powerful, ruthless in his dominance, but the man behind the crown had undergone a transformation. Fans began to notice it. A moment of hesitation in his stare-downs. A softer, almost haunted look when his entrance pyro echoed through the arena. There was still fire, yes, but there was also something more, something that felt like mourning in motion. During one segment on SmackDown, Roman stood in the ring, microphone in hand, just moments before delivering what should have been a cold, commanding monologue. But instead of launching into threats or boasting about his reign, he paused. The crowd was electric, waiting for him to speak. And when he finally did, his voice cracked, not with weakness, but with something far stronger, emotion. He looked up toward the rafters, where a banner once unfurled during Flair's WWE Hall of Fame tribute. And he simply said, "Legends never leave us. They just teach us how to keep walking." It wasn't part of the script. It wasn't rehearsed. But it was real. And in that single moment, the audience felt a ripple of understanding that Roman wasn't just performing. He was healing. And in his healing, he was quietly guiding the rest of the locker room through their own. WWE producers have since revealed that Roman became increasingly involved in the company's tribute plans for Ric Flair. Not in anticipation of his passing, but to give him flowers while he was still able to smell them. A segment was quietly filmed during a closed set, with superstars recounting their favorite Flair stories. Not the matches. Not the titles, but the man. The stories backstage. The laughter. The late-night phone calls after tough losses. Roman sat through every interview, nodding, sometimes smiling, sometimes wiping his eyes, and occasionally stepping away when the emotions hit too hard. In one particularly moving clip, Roman and Charlotte sat down together on camera. Fatherless for the moment, but not without his presence. Charlotte shared a childhood memory of watching her dad limp through the house after brutal matches, never once admitting he was in pain. Roman responded by sharing the moment he realized that strength wasn't about hiding pain, it was about carrying it for those who couldn't. That interview never aired. It wasn't meant to. It was Flair's to keep. A gift from the children he helped raise, not by blood, but by legacy. And as Flair began to recover, something miraculous happened. The public saw a version of Roman Reigns they had never witnessed before. He began posting subtle tributes online, not flashy, not performative. A single photo of Flair's robe draped over a locker room chair with the caption, "Still walking with us." A throwback image of the two men backstage with no caption at all. These weren't brand moves. These were love letters. From one generation to another. From one warrior to another, fans responded with overwhelming support. The hashtag #FightLikeFlair began trending on social media, not just among wrestling fans, but among cancer survivors, healthcare workers, and everyday people inspired by the Hall of Famer's refusal to back down. And at the center of it all stood Roman, once the villain, once the cold enforcer of the bloodline, now quietly becoming a symbol of grace, strength, and empathy. And yet, not everything was peaceful behind the scenes. As WWE management began discussing ways to honor Ric Flair during a future pay-per-view, creative disagreements arose. Some pitched a brief on-air segment. Others wanted to do a surprise Hall of Honor tribute. Roman reportedly shot those ideas down. He wanted it bigger, more honest, more raw. "Don't water this down," he allegedly told a producer. "He didn't live his life quietly. We're not going to honor him in whispers." This creative tension led to a compromise, a full documentary-style package, narrated by Roman Reigns himself, to be released the night Flair would return to WWE TV for the first time since his surgery. It was a risky move. Flair's health was still fragile, but he insisted on being there. "If I'm going out on my feet, under those lights," he reportedly told Vince McMahon in a phone call that left the longtime WWE chairman speechless. And so, on a crisp Monday night, the lights dimmed in the arena. Fans didn't know what to expect. The screens faded to black, and a voice emerged, not Flair's, but Roman's. Calm, measured, reverent. "You know the name. You know the robes. You know the walk. But do you know the fight?" he began. What followed was a 10-minute tribute that chronicled Ric Flair's journey, not just his victories, but his scars, his surgeries, his bankruptcies, his failures, and how, through it all, he remained the man. As the package ended, the camera panned to the ramp. And out walked Ric Flair, not as a guest, not as a relic of the past, but as a fighter, alive, proud, scarred, and smiling. Roman was already in the ring. He didn't break character. He didn't bow. He simply opened his arms. And Ric, with a tear in his eye, walked into them. Two generations, colliding in a moment that wasn't rehearsed or choreographed, just real. The crowd didn't chant, "Whoa." They didn't scream, "Roman." They stood in silence. And then slowly, they clapped. A standing ovation not for spectacle, but for survival, and what happened next would go on to redefine the meaning of legacy in WWE. Roman Reigns took off his head-of-the-table shirt and placed it at Flair's feet. A symbolic gesture. One that said, "We are here because of you." Flair tried to protest, but Roman shook his head. "Let them remember who taught us how to stand tall." That image. Flair standing with Roman's shirt in his hand, both men misty-eyed and overwhelmed, became an instant classic. It went viral within minutes. Not because of what it represented in storyline, but because of what it meant in life. Ric Flair is still battling. Skin cancer is not an easy enemy. And while the surgery was successful, The road ahead is long. But as long as he walks, he will never walk alone. Not with Roman behind him. Not with a universe of fans chanting his name. Not with a locker room of sons and daughters he never biologically had, but spiritually raised. And Roman? He's no longer just the tribal chief. He's become the guardian of the flame. A man who understands now more than ever that strength isn't just about dominance, it's about carrying legacy when the legends themselves can't anymore. In the weeks since, WWE has quietly begun developing a new mentorship initiative, reportedly inspired by Roman's bond with Ric Flair. Called Legacy Lives, the program aims to pair young talent with veterans for one-on-one mentorship. Roman will lead it. Flair will advise it. And the first class of protégés will walk into the future of WWE with the past proudly walking beside them. That, in the end, may be Ric Flair's greatest victory, not the titles, not the fame, but the impact. The fact that in his darkest hour, he reminded even the most powerful man in WWE that love, respect, and honor are worth more than gold, Roman Reigns cried. And in doing so, he showed us all that tears do not weaken a man. They purify him. They prepare him. They define him, and in those tears, a legacy was reborn. In the wake of Ric Flair's triumphant return and Roman Reigns' emotional tribute, the wrestling world found itself transformed, not just momentarily, but fundamentally. What had begun as a private health scare had blossomed into something much bigger than anyone expected, a cultural reset. For a company built on spectacle, showdowns, and larger-than-life personas, this moment of quiet sincerity was revolutionary. WWE had, for once, paused its endless cycle of rivalries and revenge to show reverence, to reflect, to feel, and most importantly, to remember. Backstage morale surged. Not because of a new title match or a surprise debut, but because of something far rarer: unity. For the first time in a long time, superstars across generations weren't competing for spotlight, they were sharing it. The walls that often separated the veterans from the rising stars seemed to dissolve. Charlotte Flair began spending time mentoring the women's roster more intentionally, opening up about her father's battles, not just inside the ring but inside his heart. Edge returned briefly to shoot interviews reflecting on Ric's early influence on his own career, and even Randy Orton, notoriously private, offered words of appreciation during a private team meeting, calling Flair the heartbeat that kept wrestling alive when everything else fell silent. And Roman Reigns? He carried that heartbeat with him everywhere. At live shows, Roman began appearing more frequently in unscheduled segments, not for storyline advancement, but for brief moments of honesty. He'd walk to the ring, microphone in hand, and share unscripted thoughts with the crowd. He spoke not as the tribal chief, but as Joe. About resilience. About legacy. About watching the people you love fade and finding the courage to let them keep fighting on their terms. And though the words were quiet, the impact was deafening. One such moment came during a house show in Greensboro, North Carolina. Roman stood under the spotlight and said, "When I was a kid, I wanted to be just like Ric Flair." Not because he won titles, but because he made people feel something. And now I get to stand here and thank him for making me believe in myself before I even stepped in this ring. The arena was silent. Then came the slow rise of claps. Not a thunderous pop. Not the usual chaos. Just a long, swelling applause. One that said, "We get it. We feel it too." Meanwhile, Ric Flair, recovering from surgery, had become something of a spiritual compass for those who needed it most. He began hosting small, private Zoom calls with younger talents, some of whom he'd never even met before. The sessions weren't about match structure or promo skills. They were about life. How to survive the industry. How to heal from public humiliation. How to keep your soul intact when the cameras stop rolling and the arenas go dark. Roman would often join these calls without announcement, listening silently, nodding, sometimes smiling when Flair cracked an inappropriate joke, and sometimes wiping his eyes when the conversation turned serious. One young talent, an NXT recruit from Atlanta, broke down while sharing that her father had died from the same form of cancer Ric was fighting. She said Flair's courage gave her the strength to chase her dream. And Flair, voice hoarse, replied, "Then your father lives in you every time you lace up those boots." Roman muted his mic. The silence said everything, and in all of this, WWE began to evolve. Not just as a company, but as a culture. Storylines took on more nuance. The commentary team, often so focused on branding, began weaving real emotion into the narrative fabric of the shows. You could hear the difference. Michael Cole, during a segment highlighting legends, referred to Flair not as the dirtiest player in the game, but as the man whose fight for life has inspired every soul in this building. There was no PR campaign behind it. No social media blitz. This wasn't about ratings or merchandise. This was about soul. And Roman Reigns was its vessel. That's when WWE